Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Mindset Matters, where we discuss the often and overlooked world of mental health and athletics, as well as uncovering the unique and challenging triumphs that come with an athlete's journey. I'm your host, Victoria Virgos, and with me today is Trevor, who is an experienced physiotherapist. You have your own clinic in Niagara on the Lake. You specialize in physiotherapy, sports medicine, injury prevention, and exercise physiology, if I'm not mistaken. So, thank you for
Yep.
joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It's awesome to sit down and have this chat.
Awesome. So tell me a bit about how you got into this, how long you've been running your business, and how it all kind of started.
Yeah, so I've been I guess you could call it like a general physiotherapist for about 13 years. I graduated from the University of Queensland in Australia and ended up working there for about 3 years before I moved back to Canada and working in Toronto at a few just once again kind of like generic clinics downtown. And then about 8 or 9 years ago, moved out to Niagara and just still did the same thing. And I had a I had an interest in sports all kind of like throughout my life. I played some various sports when I was younger, and always like an avid couch warrior watching it on TV. And we had an opportunity back in 2019 where a baseball team moved to Welland, which was the Welland Jackfish. And I kind of dabbled in that a little bit and just really enjoyed working on the field and being around the team. And one thing led to another, and eventually it led to me getting my master's of clinical science in sport and exercise medicine at the University of Western Ontario. And I think that was in 2022, which got me my designation as a sports physiotherapist in Canada.
Oh, cool. That's
I know it
awesome.
was a long-winded
Yeah.
story. It's not a not a little process by any means.
No, it doesn't sound like it.
No.
Um, so a question I have, like when you are working with people or like specifically athletes, like how do you find that people take recovery serious, or do you think they kind of overlook it and think there will be like no consequences if they don't, do it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could kind of answer that on a case by case basis. Sometimes people take it very, very seriously, and then, you know, from my experience, at least with the athletes I've been working with, it's about a 50-50. You'll have some who are always the one on your table after a game, or they're always, kind of going into the sauna or the cold plunge. And then you have your ones who are in the locker room cracking a beer and can't
Yeah.
wait to get away from the stadium or arena. So, I mean, I've been beating the drum time and time again to coaching staff, to the athletes that, recovery is just as an important process as warm-ups or as practices or as any kind of thing you do working out in the gym. So it's a bit of an uphill battle, but hopefully, word is starting to spread a little bit more.
Yeah, like I noticed like even with myself when I mean I should probably do a better job at partaking in recovery, but like burnout happens a lot more quickly. And
Absolutely.
like from your standpoint, when you see athletes specifically burning out, what do you see as being like a recovery process for going back?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, burnout can present in a variety of different scenarios, right? And I'm sure you've
Right.
kind of experienced this yourself, being a high level athlete, is that burnout can present psychologically,
Yeah.
in which case, like, I'm referring on at that point because I can recognize signs of it, but I don't necessarily have the tools to be able to help with the psychological burnout.
Right.
It can also present with chronic injury, right? So um, I work with some gymnasts as well at the provincial and national level. And it can be something as simple as they come in the first time with a low back injury, and then we're starting to notice over time that it's not getting better, or they present, 4 weeks later with an Achilles injury or a wrist injury, and they're starting to get that multi-joint dysfunction where we're going, you know, are you overtraining? Is there more at play here? And I think the biggest step is just being able to recognize those signs of when an athlete is starting to show signs of burnout. Because if you can't recognize it, you can't treat it.
Yeah, no, I agree with that too. And circling back a little bit, like what are
Sure.
um because like mentioned, some people take it serious, some people don't. What do you see are some long-term impacts of say like a minor injury before it can turn into something bigger if it's not taken care of properly like from the start?
Yeah, I think the two kind of go hand in hand, right? Whether we're talking about this, lingering injury or burnout. Um, I think if we let these injuries linger and try to kind of push through, it can lead to that psychological distress. It can lead to that injury lingering longer than it should, which is going to impact on performance and how the athlete feels about their performance in any given sport. But let me ask you, how often do you compete with something that's been lingering around? How often do you compete with some kind of injury that's lingering in the background? It's, nobody I think goes into a fight or into competition saying they feel 100%, right?
Never. There's always
Right. So
something.
yeah, we're always kind of battling that uphill battle of managing acute injuries when it comes to performance and trying to maximize an athlete's performance even when they're not feeling 100%.
Yeah, for sure. Um, and another thing too, this could also help me out in a sense, but when you're
Sure.
dealing with very like sore muscles after a hard session, say, or like after a hard week, and just you feel tired, you feel like you don't want to like continue, and training feels hard, you feel slow. What are some things you can do in the meantime or in between that kind of help you or give you more of a push? Like, would it be stretching? Would it be foam rolling?
Yes, yes, and yes.
Yeah.
It's, no one said being an athlete's going to be easy, right? It
No.
at times is a grind, and the higher you get at, a level or, at a national level like yourself, it really becomes more and more of a grind and really about putting that time in, right? So I don't think there's any simple answer as to how you can kind of get through that. It's just got to put your nose to the grindstone and keep pressing forwards. And, I think the people who put and invest more time into that recovery aspect after a game, whether it is a cold plunge, whether it is using the Normatec legs or the Normatec recovery system, whether it is going into the sauna or whether stretching, it does yield dividends. The research shows that time and time again.
True, yeah, because I feel like um there's always something maybe even myself or anyone is missing. Like you do this and this and this to recover. Oh, but there's also this you can do and this can help and this can help. And it's just trying to figure out doing all of it.
I know there's so much that you can do, right? And it's the same way that I think people don't like doing a whole lot of stretching pre-game
Yeah.
because it takes time, right? Like you've just competed. I don't know how long a typical boxing match takes, but for a hockey game, these guys are on the ice for 60 minutes, give or take. I think it's 40 to 60 minutes, depending on how good they are. The last thing they want to do after they've exhausted their battery is to go and sit there and put the time into recovery. But I'm sure yourself included, you find the benefit from doing it and how your body feels going into the next day. And when you have the bigger multinational or multi-day competitions where you may have to compete 2 or 3 days in a row, it becomes even more crucial and important to focus on that aspect.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Even like a difference when sometimes there's one training session a day or sometimes there's two, and it's like finding that rest and recovery in between. Sometimes it's tricky, but like if you don't do it, then you're gonna be messed up for the next one if we face it.
Yeah.
Um,
What's a training week look like for you then?
Ooh. Well, I can think about this week. I was on vacation last week, so I'm finally
Yeah.
back. But Monday to Wednesday, I had two sessions each day.
Yeah.
So it was some kind of cardio or strength in the morning, and then boxing at nighttime,
Right.
primarily or sparring. Thursday, I had pretty long session. It was strength and conditioning strictly, but every time there's a certain coach at my gym who runs that session every time I'm done with it, like for days my body's just messed up. Even today it's
Right.
Saturday, and since Thursday I'm really sore still. So
Yeah.
had that. Fridays are still one or two sessions boxing. and Saturdays just one, and Sundays are usually off. So
Yeah. So at least there's that. I know it's kind of like frowned upon in the athletic community to have rest days, but I do think, having at least one is crucial. There are some days where the guys don't go on the ice or they're not on the field swinging a bat or they're not in the gym lifting weights. It is important. And I'm sure we'll talk about it even more so later. But what does recovery look like for you then? What do you do on a typical Sunday?
on a Sunday, I try to, well, besides sleeping in if I can, um, there's a walk. I try to do like a long walk or like a any kind of hike. Obviously stretching. I have
Yeah.
like a ball and like a foam roller. I use those. And I do have a cold plunge. I really don't like to use cold plunges. They're very uncomfortable for me, but like
Yeah.
I have to do it. I find them painful, but I know they're helpful. Or
Yeah.
sometimes an Epsom salt bath.
Yeah, nice. Nice. So a little bit of body maintenance. Yeah, the cold plunges are they're super super trendy right now. I know my Facebook is littered with ads about cold plunges because I'm trying to get myself into one. And we actually just with the hockey team last year in the playoffs, we got the hockey team to agree to a cold plunge in a sauna, and the guys were pretty adamant about using it, but I don't think they used it for as long as they should have. I think most guys were in and out in about 10 to 30 seconds instead of
Mm,
the more than 2 minutes. But there's value in being uncomfortable as well during the recovery process.
yeah. And with the cold plunge, like it depends. Like my lower body, my legs get used to it, but it's like my hands, it's my upper half. I can't stay. And I know it's recommended for like 6 minutes, but if it's gonna be six
Yeah.
minutes, like maybe just my legs, that's all I can do. I'll get better over time. Um,
Yeah, for sure.
but yeah, so um also another thing, I've dealt with minor injuries in the past. Thankfully, nothing too bad right now. But when working with someone who's injured, like how do you clear them and how do you let them kind of go back into their sport? How do you see that they're
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is it's never really a decision that just lies purely with me, right? Like, I mean, if it comes down to a broken bone, there are certain people in place to give that athlete clearance. I remember it was my second year with Fort Erie, and we had a player actually in November break his femur going into the boards.
Mm,
And clinically, we were saying to him leading up to playoffs that he's matched all the markers I would need for him to return to play. He had strength that was somewhat equal between the two sides. He was on the ice skating around. He was able to shoot a puck off one leg. He was able to compete with the other athletes on the ice, but the surgeon wouldn't give him clearance to go back from a bone healing perspective. So that's the first avenue, is that there are certain medical restrictions in place dependent upon the injury that'll dictate when an athlete can go back to sport or not. For your minor, like soft tissue injuries, like let's say it's a sprained ankle or even a torn muscle, I'm a bit of a cowboy that aspect in that, like, I'll patch you up with glue and tape and bandages as much as I need to get you back. Um, but that's going to be different than the overall return to performance. I think we can often get athletes back playing through some degree of pain much
yeah.
sooner than we can get them back returning to that high level of elite performance. So I think, I have strategies in place with returning to sport, such as making sure their sport specific abilities can meet the demands of playing in a competition, but that's going to be different from whether they can compete at the high level they were pre-injury. And I know that's a long-winded answer to basically say they go back, but we just want to make sure that when they are going back, they are safe to do so. And that's often going to be much sooner than them achieving full performance.
For sure. Yeah, like I remember too, I was a gymnast before as well, and I guess this wasn't really a minor injury, it was more severe, but I had an elbow injury, like piece of my
Right.
cartilage had I guess chipped off from overuse and
Yeah.
it went to a different part of my arm. So we went to just like a general doctor, like at McMaster, and he told me just then and there, like, oh, you're never gonna be able to do gymnastics again. And as like an 11-year-old, it was pretty
I
heartbreaking. I was
know.
like, what do you mean? Like,
Yeah.
but we found another doctor, like a surgeon, pretty
Yeah.
far, and he was like, "Oh no, like I've had people with this before too who can return like we're gonna do surgery and then you're gonna recover and it'll be fine. So
Yeah,
it's
I feel
definitely
like
finding the right
yeah,
people.
it's definitely on a case by case basis. It is finding the right people, right? Like I'm not someone who sits there and will ever give them an absolute you can't return to a sport, right? I look at my job as a physiotherapist is to try to give you guys the tools and equip you in the best way I can to return back to compete in the sport at a level you want to. Now, that may be a short process, but it also may be a very long process depending on the severity of the injury. But, you got to be very patient dependent and try to match your goals with what the patient want or with what the athlete wants to achieve. So, if you want to compete, let's go. Like let's get you back to being a gymnast, right?
Yeah, no, for real.
Yeah.
Um, Also, just this is just a question that came to me. Have you ever dealt
Sure.
with any concussed athletes? Have you dealt with concussions
Tons.
before? Tons, yeah. So,
Victoria, have you ever watched hockey? Like,
yeah, no, I
yeah,
would
I
like
think I think on average we probably deal with one or two concussions a week,
that's a lot.
of varying severities. From one as simple as like just feeling a little bit of head fog or mental fogginess, to one we had in the playoffs where one of the athletes didn't even remember why his wrist was taped. And we had been doing it all the way up until the third round every single game. So yeah, it's concussion management and recognition is very important in elite sports, especially because of the implications of what can happen if you do miss them.
Yeah, I was asking because I mean, I've seen it with teammates, I've seen it with myself when we're not entirely certain to determine whether it's a concussion or not. I've had a couple
Right.
matches where afterwards, or even sparring matches after, I feel a little just like fuzzy, a little not with it, but it's not it's not like extreme, so I'm never sure if it's like I was just rattled or if it's like an extreme concussion. But I mean, I've never been diagnosed with a concussion.
Yeah. So what's the process then in boxing if you feel not 100%? Who do you report that to, and what's the process you would go through?
So, like a head injury, obviously your coach should be watching, but if not,
Yeah.
you have to tell them. And um, it's recommended to go to a doctor and to see someone right away for that.
Right.
After that, obviously no sparring, no contact, probably no training for like a good week or two
Yeah.
until you
Yeah.
return, or no screens, nothing like that. Treating it like a concussion, even if it's not for sure. Um,
Yeah.
Although there are some coaches and gyms that are they let it go a little too easy and are like, it's just part
Right.
of the sport. Next day they're back doing the same thing, and it's like, well, I hope in a couple years they're still okay.
Yeah. I mean, with concussion recognition and rehab right now, there's kind of this motto that goes with it, which is when in doubt, sit them out, right? And if ever you're unsure whether they have a concussion or not, the athlete shouldn't be competing because even if there is a hint of doubt in your mind, it's likely there's some degree of deficit that needs to be addressed. So I would say, just from an objective observer, obviously we'll want to get you assessed and seen right away to determine are there any deviations from your normal. Um, but probably sit out.
Yeah, I would agree. Like, it was recently for me too,
Yeah.
after an intense sparring match. I was like, this is the worst it's ever been. I'm like, I don't know if I want to know if I'm concussed because I was supposed to fight the weekend after. This probably
Oh
sounds
no.
absolutely horrible to like throw out there, but I still really
Yeah.
wanted to fight. So I took my rest and I didn't spar for the rest of the week or anything. And I was okay. It took a couple of
Yeah.
days, but in that moment it's a little scary. It's like, well, what if I actually am concussed? Then it will only get worse.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it's always easy to say just sit people out, right? But when you're coming up to, the furthest you've been in the playoffs or, the team's really dependent on you, like let's say your starting goalie goes down with a concussion, you then turn around and tell the head coach and tell the athlete that, hey, listen, like it's a difficult conversation to have. Obviously, the right thing to do is to sit the person out, but sometimes that's not an easy discussion, and sometimes the athlete doesn't want to sit out as well.
No,
So it's a very difficult kind of situation. But I'd say concussions are probably one of those absolutes with me, where no matter what, you're going to be sitting out until you can prove to me that you are not concussed and you can compete at that pre-concussion level.
it's fair to say, yeah.
Yeah.
And obviously seeing people or athletes like with overuse injuries, I've had some as well. Do you have any tips on like balancing like pushing yourself but also not like overtraining at the same time?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm answering a lot of questions, turning it around and questioning you. How do you monitor overtraining for you?
Well, I'll be honest here. I'm pretty bad with it. I'm trying to get
Yeah,
better at it. I'm pretty bad with like just being like, it's okay. This is like how boxing is. Just finish the week. But like, there's been matches where like I'm like, wow, that was absolutely horrible. Like, I need to listen
right,
to my body more because that performance, like, that should not have happened. Like, it can be a lot
right.
better. And like, as we were saying earlier, like sometimes it's not just the physical part. Like sometimes I feel it mentally where it's like you lose some motivation, you lose like passion, I guess is the right word. It comes
Yep.
back, but temporarily it's like, wow, I don't really feel like doing this. I don't want to do this. Like, feels like a chore.
Yeah, yeah. So I think obviously the best way is being able to kind of like self-monitor, right? And sometimes there are questionnaires that'll actually allow us to determine where we are mentally in our recovery process to determine if we're overtraining. I mean, there are all those physiological biomarkers, heart rate variability, sleep duration, all those kinds of things where we can really determine are we getting enough rest? Are we recharging our battery enough? Are we hydrated enough? So, I mean, the higher you get, the more that stuff becomes monitored. I think someone told me, I think it was one of the football team's new stadiums actually had a monitor in the urinal to be able to determine how dehydrated the athletes were based on the concentration of their urine. So, I mean, it'd be nice if we all had unlimited funds to be able to monitor that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. But I think something as simple as questionnaires or handwritten tools can be really effective from a mental state because I think mental state and long-term health and overtraining go hand in hand.
Yeah, actually, it's funny you say that. I remember last year they at a Boxing Canada camp, they wanted to see how hydrated we were. They did roughly the same thing. They tested everyone and they were like everyone's dehydrated, like not one person passed. So
Right.
it's yeah, like it plays into effect. And I'm sure a lot of people, because it wasn't too long ago, like where I realized you can drink all the water in the world, but if there's no like electrolytes, if there's no
Yeah.
sodium, then it's not really doing anything. Like you're just
A
gonna
hundred percent.
pee the
I'm
whole time.
I'm a runner myself, and I've really gone down the rabbit hole of electrolyte supplementation and carbohydrate supplementation. And I did a half marathon back in May, and I'm not gonna pump my tires too much. I'm not an elite
Okay.
runner by any means, but when I focus on hydration and focus on that replenishment of carbohydrates during competition, I actually noticed my performance and my recovery at the end of the race was actually much better than I ever could have imagined. So, that's kind of getting into the practice what you preach kind of scenario. And yeah, I just think there's so much value in being able to kind of like self-monitor yourself in those situations.
Yeah, I was gonna actually ask about that. Like with running, my first question being like, well, I have a few, but the first one is like before, say, like a long race, marathon, or run, or just, yeah, even just running, like what do you find to be like the best meal or snack? Do you eat a lot? Do you eat a little bit? Like, how does that work for you?
Yeah, so I know when it comes up to like approaching a marathon, the old thought process is like you carb load the meal the night before, right? And I still engage in that. Like I still love going out for pasta or pizza, but
Of
the
course.
morning of myself personally is I'm a bit of an anxious runner, so leading up to the start of the race, my anxiety builds. So I remember it was in 2016 before the New York Marathon. I was actually in my hotel room with my wife, and I just couldn't even bring myself to get out of the
Mm.
hotel room to go get something to eat. So there was my wife, first time really traveling, ending up having to go into New York City and find something to eat. Um, so I think the big meal before still rings true to me, and then I like to keep it nice and light the morning of, but also falling into that like long-lasting carbohydrate, right? Avoid the white breads and go more to the multi-grain, whole grain carbohydrates that give you more of a sustained boost of energy kind of thing.
Sure. And yeah, the reason I'm asking is because
Sure.
we have to do a lot of running too as part of like our programs. But when running, because this is something I struggle with, how do you keep like a consistent pace? I find like as time goes on, like more like it gets slower and slower, and I'm like, when is this gonna be done?
How long do they have you running for typically?
It depends, anywhere between 5 to 10 kilometers, but like they want to say at a fast pace, but even like with that, sometimes I struggle. So I'm not gonna lie, running's not my best, but have to
Yeah.
do it.
Yeah, I mean, when you start to get more to the long distances, like things above, 10-kilometer kind of thing, I'd say fuel and nutrition become even more integral to maintaining that pace. There have been times when I've gone out on a long run and we see my pace start up here, and just taking gradual water drinks, we still see my pace kind of come down towards the end of the run. And when I properly hydrate, so I think the recommendation is like you take a carbohydrate supplementation at 45 minutes and then every 30 minutes afterwards.
Mm,
I did notice my pace was better sustained throughout the duration of the race. So um, I think that is crucial. Hydration, and nutrition are always going to be key to every discussion we have, whether it's
yeah,
maintaining pace, maintaining performance. I think it's always a component of what we do. And then I don't know about yourself, but I like listening to music that tends to match up to my pace as well. But psychologically, it's difficult as well too, right? And I know, especially when running the longer distances like the marathon, it's very easy to kind of give up on your pace and go, "Oh, I'm just going to take a break and walk." And I find it's very hard to get started and run after you've taken a walking break. So I think mental performance in those situations is just as crucial as anything else too.
I agree with that for sure. Um, what's the longest you've ever run?
Yeah, so I've done I think two full marathons now. So I did the New York City Marathon and the Ottawa Marathon. So that's 42.2 kilometers.
Wow.
I was scheduled to do Marine Corps Marathon at the end of this year, and I was scheduled to do Toronto Marathon. But because the baseball team did as well as they did last season, and the hockey team did as well as they did last season, my training was just kind of all over the place. So I knocked that down to a half marathon in May. And then the Marine Corps Marathon was in the States, in Washington, D.C., 1 week before the election. So upon having a discussion with my wife, we kind of elected to push that back just by a year. So we're a little more sure about what's going on.
Yeah. Um, and like for a full marathon,
Yeah.
what does training look like for that? How long are you doing runs or how
Yeah.
often?
It's a grind.
Yeah.
Personally myself, I own Great North Physiotherapy in Niagara on the Lake. So my ability to train is difficult just based on my other commitments. I'm a dad of
Right.
four at home as well. So ideally on a given week, I like to be out there running 3 to 4 times, and I like to be starting that probably about 6 months before an actual race, if not a little bit more.
Okay.
And there's any number of variety of runs I do throughout the week. Like there may be interval training to build up my speed. There may just be like a easy run and then your long distance run. So it all just kind of depends on the training plan you're on.
Interesting. This
Yeah.
is kind of like a side question with that because
Sure.
I I'm curious, but What running shoes do you recommend? I wear Asics, but like I've seen better ones and I'm not sure like
Yeah.
what is the best one.
Yeah, there's no one right one for anybody, right?
Yeah.
I think I should say that the best shoe for you is the one that feels the best the moment you put your foot into it. That's kind of my recommendation to my runners. You know, I know personally I've run in Asics, I've run in Sauconys, I've run in Brooks, I've run in Hoka's, I've run in every kind of different shoe there is, and they all felt good at the time. And then your foot evolves, your running pattern evolves, and that
Yeah,
may not be the right shoe for you at the time. So I don't think there's one specific right brand of shoe that's right for anyone.
that's fair. That's fair.
Yeah.
Um, well, I'd like to say thank you, wrapping it up. There was a
Yeah,
lot
thanks for
I'm
having me.
sure everyone can learn. I learned a lot too.
Yeah.
Um, I'm sure we'll keep in touch. We'll see each other again. And thank you for joining
Yeah,
all
not a
our
problem.
listeners. So thank you.
And just wanted to say congrats on getting a place on the Canada U19 team.
Thank you.
That's huge. Look forward to seeing what you do and seeing if you can kick some ass and bring home the gold.
Woo.
Yeah, let's go. Go get it.
Yes.
And I guess if people want to check us out, they can look on our Instagram, Great North Physio or TK Sport Physio. We have our website, greatnorthphysio.ca, or on Facebook at Great North Physiotherapy.
Awesome. Perfect.
That's awesome. Thanks, Victoria.
Thank you.